Hello, family members. I hope you're having a nice day today. I want to talk about something that happened a little while ago, and so by internet terms, I'm probably like way behind the curve here, but you know, I do tend to think that waiting a little bit to talk about current events means that you get a little bit more time to collect a perspective on it. So, I'm not gonna say that that's not a good thing. Maybe we all ought to get used to watching things that are a little out of date. But anyway, I wanted to talk about Jake Paul getting his face broken by Anthony Joshua. Now, before I start this, something that's happened since all of that is the horrific uh, car crash that Anthony Joshua was involved in. I have read very conflicting information about what the real cause was. And all of the parties that I've gotten information from seem highly motivated for their version to be the right version. So I'm not going to take it on faith that it was, the fault of anyone in that car or it was the fault of the Nigerian government for having such terrible roads or whatever I don't know what the cause is. I think that's still kind of up in the air. But what we do know for certain is that Anthony Joshua lost two friends in that and teammates. And, that's just awful. I feel very, very sad for what happened to those two young men and everyone who's affected by it. And I hope that Mr. Joshua is able to recover. I don't know much about him beyond the fact that he was part of this sort of globally viral moment and then part of this car accident. You know, I'm not trying to say that he's like a great dude or anything. I don't know that, but I don't believe that anybody deserves to be in a horrific car wreck or to lose friends like that. So, just want to take a moment to acknowledge that that had happened and that, it's awful. It's the kind of thing that can happen to anybody at any time, no matter if you're doing everything right. All right, that digression aside, let's go back to Jake Paul. So, okay, Jake Paul is again somebody I don't know a whole lot about. I'm a very terminally online person, but that online is on YouTube. And the good thing about YouTube is you don't necessarily have to see things outside of your bubble if you're not looking for it. And so, the kind of content that this Paul guy and his brother upload just isn't anything that I would be interested in. I'm not their target demographic. That's not uh like a ding on them. It's just me saying I don't think there would have been much chance, no matter what kind of content that they made, that it would overlap with things that were interesting to me. Just that's fine. Not everything has to be for me, right? Not everything has to be for everyone. But the one thing I do know about Jake Paul is that his brother is always getting accused of lots of scam stuff. And usually this other Paul brother, the one that was actually involved in the fight, isn't really involved in all the scam stuff that I see about. So I don't know if that means that he's less horrible than his brother or not. But I do know that he has been in a series of high profile fights with retired fighters as a young, fit man. And that's always made me side eye the guy. And so I knew enough about that to be very delighted when I found out that he had finally gotten a real boxer to actually fight him and had just the most hilarious videos and pictures of the fight online where very clearly this man was way in over his head. And it was hard not to see it as sort of a visual metaphor for what's going on in America right now. This overly confident, rich white man who who has so much privilege that he can't even see the fact that he's not an actual fighter. He's just a guy who's able to pay retired fighters to get into the ring with him for little exhibitions. And that's not the same as being a real boxer. Like, I'm not a big fan of boxing. I understand that it's a sport that a lot of people do truly love, and I feel I don't enjoy watching people get hurt. I don't enjoy it. So it's never going to be a sport that's going to appeal to me, because the goal is to harm people, And but I will say I'd rather see people do that in an MMA ring or a boxing ring where they're trained, the people around them know what to do if something goes wrong, all of that. If this is something that is important to people, and it clearly is, that they need to do, that they feel like they need to engage in this kind of sport, this is about as good as it's going to get as far as my moral view. And so, I don't begrudge people who that means something to them. I have a lot of respect for people who are passionate about some sport and then work really hard and to be able to participate in it. I think that's great. And if Jake Paul was the kind of person who was just passionate and wanted to do his best and was just going and having a good time, that'd be one thing. But he's the kind of guy who clearly is trying to feed his delusion about his own talents when it comes to fighting by being in these exhibition matches, and clearly bought into his own storytelling, that he wasn't just someone who was sort of playing at being a boxer and doing exhibition matches, but he really clearly, even now, still believes that he's a real fighter. And that's what I wanted to talk about. That's why it tipped me over the line from this is something that is kind of an interesting metaphor for now, and there's some great memes on it too. This actually says something deeper, and I think people are missing that. So that's what this is I want to talk to you about what this says about our young men today, some of our young men today, so clearly, that people are not picking up on. And the fact of the matter is, it was very, very shortly after I started seeing all these funny memes and I'd react to them and blah, 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 that I started seeing content from, like, boxer fans primarily, or like Jake Paul fans primarily, that were unironically like defending him. That were like, oh, yeah, well, this is good for the sport of boxing. It's bringing a lot of attention to boxing. Oh, yeah. Oh, at least he got in the ring, at least. And this is also what Andrew Tate had to say about his recent epic boxing loss, or whatever it was. Yeah, I think it was boxing, too. I don't think it was MMA. That wasn't as big of a meme, but it was also part of the same sort of meme crowd, right? But he was like, well, I got in there and I did the thing, and, a lot of people will never do that, and that's great, and so I win in a way. And Actually, that isn't the worst thing that he could have said. Like, it's weird to me because I know that Andrew Tate guy is very squirrely, but at least he acknowledged that he truly lost. Like, at least he did. So that's something. I'll give him that. But there's all of this, like, excuses, excuses, excuses on the part of the sycophants. But where it really crossed the line is when you start hearing Jake Paul saying similar stuff. Like, oh, he had a weight advantage on me. Oh, I didn't, I was sick. I didn't have enough sleep, blah, blah, blah. And I realized he has learned nothing, absolutely nothing from this. Like, he got the most literal reality check to the face that a person can get, and he has learned nothing. And his fans have learned nothing. And that is the real problem here, isn't it? I mean, yeah, the fact that he hyped himself up to the point where he believed he was a real boxer, and kept pushing and pushing until he got someone who was really a real boxer to fight him. And then, reality knocked him off his feet. uh, that wasn't enough for him to really truly step back and go, oh, maybe my self-perception is wrong. Maybe it's not all these excuses, but maybe there is, maybe people who told me I wasn't really a boxer were right. That's not at all going to be the message he takes away from this. And I don't think we should be surprised. I mean, I know I've always had people in my life who could talk away, explain away anything that they did wrong in their lives. Would never accept any sort of responsibility for anything. Now, oh, I'm not late because it's my fault. I'm late because that stupid bus stop took too long. Oh, it's not my fault. I had to stop and get gas because there wasn't enough gas in there, and that couldn't have been my fault either. I mean, like, oh, such and so hates me. It's just because they don't like the color green, and that's my favorite color. And it's not about me personally. It's definitely about them. Like, no matter what it is, those type of people. You have those type of people in your life. No matter what they do or don't do, when they're called out, they will always find a way to explain it away. And they may not be able to convince anybody else other than themselves, but to them, that's enough. And so, in their own little realities, they're always the victim. People are just being mean to them. People are making too big of a deal about this bad thing they did. Blah, 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 blah. And, clearly, celebrities and rich people are going to be more susceptible to that, right? Because they're going to have an easier time, weaseling out of the consequences of their actions, because, they're going to have people who have these parasocial relationships with them that want to give them an excuse. They're going to have, all sorts of things like that. All these advantages, they can just pay for things to go away. They can just be given a free pass because people like them for unrelated reasons. There's any number of reasons why for the rich and famous, they're already going to have an easier time getting away with these lies to themselves, to these desperate justifications for them to have not been wrong in the first place. or to not acknowledge that they've made a mistake. And it's actually really difficult to call yourself out on that. Like it is. I'll give people like that some credit that challenging yourself, uh, to paraphrase something that H. Bomber's guy said a while ago, like skepticism is not knowing when other people are right, it's knowing when you are right and challenging yourself. That if you aren't able to challenge yourself, then who's going to be able to challenge you? Really? It's not that easy. And so, I guess it shouldn't be much of a surprise that it happened so quickly, that the fans of Mr. Paul, or of boxing or whatever, would try to come in here and be like, oh, no, 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 this is a good thing. By the way, I do want to kind of do a little aside here. If you think that it's good for the sport of boxing that this happened, it's brought more attention to boxing, it's not. I do know who Anthony Joshua is now. I will give you that. That's about the only thing I could say. But it doesn't make me more likely to follow it going forward. Doesn't make me more likely to want to watch it. Not all attention is good attention. And I think a thing like this actually makes your sport look less legitimate. It looks like, just because a man is young and appears fit, that he can just buy his way into it, if he's got enough money or enough influence. That doesn't make your sport look better, okay? If you're sitting here thinking, no, 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 Jake Paul brought a lot of eyes and attention to the sport, it's good for the sport. No. Some of the boxing sources might have seen a little bit of a spike of attention and gotten a little more engagement and been able to monetize that engagement. But it was a one-time thing. And something that gives you a little bit of a short-term benefit but makes your sport look bad in the long run, it's probably not worth it. Like, I know that we live in this hyper-capitalist society where private equity firms are going in and destroying things like Toys R Us and Bed Bath and Beyond and blah, 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 in order to make shareholders a little bit more profit in the short term. But then, of course, blowing up their business in the long run. That's not good. It's not a good investment. Clever businesses would not be doing that. If they really wanted to make their shareholders money in the long run, they would not be doing that. But they don't care about long-term investment. They only care about short-term. And yeah, there's a big difference there. And so, no, this hasn't been good for the sport of boxing. Absolutely, it's not. Okay. But I think it is indicative of something that we don't talk about nearly enough, and that is being mentally healthy. And by mentally healthy, it's almost difficult to talk about. Because when somebody says mental health, they can mean a lot of things. They can mean someone who has some sort of biochemical imbalance in their brain that makes them depressed or manic or whatever. And they be talking about legitimate personality disorders. They could be talking about, PTSD and post-traumatic, mental illness, things like that. But there's something else that they are talking about, and I think is more prevalent and more important than people realize, and that is just being a mentally healthy person, in the sense that you have appropriate coping mechanisms, that you have the ability to self-reflect. It's the kind of being emotionally healthy that doesn't come from sort of mental illness. It comes from an intellectual laziness that is just far too encouraged in our current society. The idea of not having information that, being an expert is somehow bad is has been prevalent since, the George Bush days. I mean, the last 25 years has been a real spiral down in terms of respect for learning, education, educating yourself, taking the time to challenge yourself and become a better person. That's almost hostilely rejected by many, especially conservatives these days. It's like the less you know, the louder you should be. And that's kind of ridiculous, right? People like this Jake Paul are not emotionally healthy. They're not mentally well, but they're not mentally ill in the sense, well, I don't know. But I don't believe that we're talking about someone being mentally ill in the sense of like, you know, schizophrenia. When I say I think that Jake Paul has delusions of grandeur, I don't mean that in a clinical sense. I mean that in a very like common sense. I mean that in the sense of somebody who has never been challenged and doesn't challenge themselves and is unable to have a mentally healthy life because of that. We talk about toxicity a lot in terms of romantic relationships, sometimes familial relationships. But we forget that a person's relationship with oneself, with themselves, can be toxic too. That they can be their own worst enabler. That they can be encouraging the worst parts of themselves to grow and become stronger and are their own worst enemy. And we don't raise emotionally healthy young men in this country generally. We just don't. Uh, we don't do it for women either, but I think it's a little bit different because women aren't told that they are not allowed to have feelings other than happiness and anger. That's all that men are allowed to feel in this current version of American society. They're allowed to be angry and they're allowed to be happy, and they're not allowed to be sad or reflexive or reflective or soft or any number of conflicted. We don't want, as a society, we don't want men who are complicated and feel their feelings and know that they feel their feelings and don't feel embarrassed by them. And how are you going to be an emotionally healthy person if you can't truly be honest with yourself? If you've always got to lie to yourself that you're bigger and stronger and tougher than you actually are, you can't be an emotionally healthy person. Those young men, those Paul brothers and the Tate brothers and all of them, they can't ever be happy. They're always going to be looking for more because they are not allowed to do anything other than accumulate wealth and build bigger muscles. If they don't feel satisfied with their lives, they're allowed to do those two things. Maybe get a girlfriend, but you can't treat her right. You can't have a real deep emotional connection with a girlfriend or a wife if you're one of those types of men, because that would be putting a woman up on the same pedestal as you put yourself. And that's not acceptable, Treating other people, any other people, male or female, your friends, your family, anybody, as important to you as yourself is frowned upon. Human beings are a collectivist species. We are not like cheetahs. Cheetahs in the wild, the only time you see cheetahs together is you occasionally will get small bachelor groups before, a male is big enough and strong enough to have his own territory. And then when you see a female with babies. Otherwise, cheetahs are solitary. They don't pack hunt. They're not like lions. They're not like wolves. Humans are more like wolves, or more like lions, more like elephants, more like a lot of other species where there is an emotional need to work and live as a group. It's not just a survival need. It's not just about food. It's not just about territory or anything else like that. You know, we know that elephants mourn each other. That's why there's elephant graveyards. They go back to the remains of their fallen and remember them. Even when it's just bones left, they still do that. Wolves take care of injured pack mates. And so do lions in certain circumstances. Like, there is a collectivist strategy that our species uses to get by in the world. And that's from a strictly, like biological perspective. You can also add on that basically all human religions sort of preach that same thing. Not all, but most of them preach that there is a value in community and helping each other. And I think that a lot of people want to think of human beings as being separate from animals when they're not. Or that think that humans have somehow, we're above, like our biological need for community, which we're not. Like, you can't be a healthy person if there's no one in your life that can call you on your bullshit. One of the worst things that can happen to a person is that they become rich and successful and famous. Look at Andrew Lloyd Webber. Andrew Lloyd Webber has created some of the most beloved, musical theater of the modern era. Now, I don't like his style, but I do acknowledge that his craft is high level, or has been high level, and has created pieces of art that will stand the test and have stood the test of time. I saw Cats during its original Broadway run. I hate Cats, but I go, yeah, that was a really great experience. My gosh, that was really cool to see. I'm glad I got to see it. I would never go do that again, but I'm glad I got to see it, But his more modern works, like Bad Cinderella or the sequel to Phantom of the Opera, have real problems. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that it's hard for him to take criticism, take feedback. He became so famous that he basically made it impossible for him to ever do what he achieved fame for again. Sometimes when people get everything they want, it leads them down bad, dark paths. And so I think that people like this Jake Paul being so influential in young men's lives, they hold him up as sort of a role model. It's dangerous in a way, because he is telling them that no, you don't have mental health. You're just a man. Just go work out, be tougher, big, stronger, make more money, sleep with more bitches, whatever it is. You know, I don't know all of those are his specific messages. I'm just people like him. Um, and that's not true. He is high on his own supply, so to speak, and he's taken other young men around for the ride with him. And I think that is the biggest problem we have about mental health in this country is we don't look at those young men who don't have the biochemical mental illnesses, that don't necessarily have the trauma-based mental illnesses, but are nonetheless mentally unwell in the sense that they are not exercising their emotional well-being. They're not challenging themselves, they're not learning, they're not growing. They are allowing their emotional selves to just simply wither on the vine. And that kind of mental unwellness isn't the same as mental illness, but it gets talked about the same way because we don't really have elegant ways of discussing it, I think, is a lot of the problem there. You know, a lot of the times, like right-wing pundits, say your Ben Shapiro's or whatever, will talk about people who have policy positions different than them as being insane. Like, that's insane. And what they mean that is that I don't find that logic compelling. I don't find it as being sound, sane logic. But that doesn't mean that it's coming from a place of mental unwellness. We will talk about people being insane pejoratively as if we can just mash it all together. That, you know, unsound logic is insane, and, you know, having a biochemical imbalance in your brain is insane, and, you know, having PTSD is insane, and it makes it so much more difficult to talk about how we need to address the different types of mental unwellness differently. You know, you can give someone with a biochemical imbalance a pill and that'll help them. But if the real cause of their mental unwellness is that they refuse to even acknowledge the fact that they have an emotional well-being that's worth taking care of, there's nothing you can do for them. I think I'm out of time. I don't even know if this is still recording at this point.